Hey y'all, it's 20 after now. We'd like to get started because this is sure to be a busy session. Could our area directors pay attention? So this is DOE, the DNS over HTTPS working group. If you've come for something else, you've come to the wrong place. We're going to spend the next hour on some pretty contentious topics, as you've seen on the mailing list. We're going to first start off with Paul Hoffman's draft today. And I should mention before going into that, however, Ben Schwartz, the usual DNS DOE co-chair, could not be present this week. And so we kindly have a substitute. Would you like to introduce yourself, Pete, for any who don't know?
Most folks should know that I'm Pete Resnick, and I'm not Ben Schwartz, so don't hurt me.
And don't hurt Ben either. Or
Harder to hurt far away.
And so for the agenda, basically for the, we've allocated the first half hour to talk about Paul Hoffman's existing draft adopted by the working group for associating DOE resolvers. And then we are going to use the balance of the time to talk about other work that has come up and where its home should be.
Shall we note well?
Oh, yeah. For any of you who have never been here before and seen this sort of thing, the IETF has a set of policies in effect that cover our guidance and how our discussions are run. If you have not previously read this, you really should, because this basically is the controlling document for your participation in the IETF. Paul Hoffman.
Where's the full screen on this?
So I'm going to start off while he's trying to find full screen. This is not Paul Hoffman's draft. This is a full working group draft. And for those of you who've been following it since it was Paul Hoffman's draft, you will recognize that many of the protocols in it did not originate with me. They originated with people from the working group and from the community who said, your original ideas suck, these are better, and they were right. So I just want to be really clear. This is a working group draft. It has to have consensus. It doesn't matter what I think. Well, I mean, I guess it matters a little bit what I think, but I don't get to override anything. So next slide.
Do you want to click?
Oh,
We'll see if it clicks. If it doesn't, I'll click.
It clicks. Isn't life good? Okay, so since the last meeting that we had, at the last meeting, it was still Paul Hoffman's draft. Although even at that point, it had a lot of stuff in it that I did not originate. The document's been adopted by the working group, so it is a full working group document. It follows normal working group rules. I've published about 3 versions, and I say 3-ish because one of them was a mistake. So it sort of was a tombstone-y one. The 02 was a major reorganization from the 00 that the working group adopted, and the reason we did that was because people were getting caught up with the order. Since it's 3 protocols, and I'll actually cover the 3 protocols at the end of the presentation. People assumed that you had to do the 3 protocols in order, or that 3 were more important. So I reorganized to be what people were indicating as the one they understood the best, the one that they sort of understood, and why are we even doing this one? So that's the current order. And then the 03, which just came out a couple weeks ago before the cutoff deadline, smaller changes, but many people asked for examples. So I added the examples and clarifying, but probably not fully clarifying, the privacy and security considerations. And I say that because a lot of the other discussion, the discussion that's happening on simultaneously on the DOE, deprive, DNS op, you know, thank God we haven't actually gotten it onto IETF general yet, but it only will take time. Those things people have then, you know, pointed out privacy and security considerations that affect not only DOE, DOT, and DNS over 53, but also this document as well. So I'm trying, I mean, this document is going to remain just this document. It's not going to become an overarching document. But there are still more privacy and security considerations probably that will need to be made. So where we're at now is hard to tell because following 4 different mailing lists for the same topic is sort of difficult, especially when not everything gets posted to all of them. I'm not saying they should all be posted to all of them. I'm just saying that people are having some mismatch issues. It seems to me, and I'm saying this as an individual, that there is still strong interest in having the capability that this document is aiming at. Some browser vendors have said that, many individuals have said that. So it seems like there is still interest in this. And I haven't heard many people saying, no, don't do what this is about. But there have been some concerns about the actual protocols in there. And I forget if it was Martin or Steve who said that they were icky. There has been statement that the way that we are currently proposing to do this in this document has some ickiness to it, with no suggestions that came out that were, that people said, yes, that's better. And then the last, Ben, are you going to interrupt? Do you want me?
Yeah, I think I probably should. So Ben Kaduk, you said several things about what mailing lists this has been on, and you did say please don't put them on all of them, or
I
please don't
didn't
put
say
them on
that.
the
I
IETF
just
list.
said that it's hard for those of us who are trying to follow to have to follow them on all the mailing lists.
Right. I just want to point out that per the IETF discussion list charter, this topic is explicitly off topic for that list. So please do not send there. I don't want to have to put my Sergeant at Arms hat on and have to ban people or something.
Can you just say that again? Because I'm not sure everyone understands that the IETF mailing list has its own set of rules.
Yeah, so there's, oh gosh, I should know. Is it RFC 3005?
It's an old one.
Yeah, it is the charter for the IETF discussion list, or IETF at IETF.org. And it has stands in there that says topics that have their own topic-specific discussion lists are not appropriate for the IETF general discussion list.
And the fact that so working group mailing lists have working group chairs who occasionally step in and say what's on topic or not. But the IETF general mailing list has multiple sergeants at arms, of which you are one of them, if I remember correctly.
That is correct.
And so you can come in and say, I've looked at this and please don't do this.
Right.
Okay, great, thanks. Martin, do you want me to finish, or do you want to?
I think I might be responding to the point that you just made before the interruption, so I think it's probably best that I say it now.
Yep.
No suggestions for how to achieve. Martin Thompson, I apologize. For being Martin Thompson, yes.
That's right. I apologize for being Martin Thompson as well.
Thank you. The more of us that can do that, the better. The no suggestions for how to achieve the goals better, I just wanted to get up and sort of jump
I'm sorry?
to that. The point here that you make, the claim that you make that there was no suggestions made for how to achieve the goals better, I think is a little unfair.
Okay.
So I did make
see
some
them.
suggestions. They were not concrete. I agree.
Okay,
But
sorry. Good point. Good point.
yes.
Yeah.
I offered some avenues of investigation that I don't know whether you've considered or not, but certainly there
I
are
have
some options
not.
you can
I'm
pursue.
waiting for the mailing list to respond on those.
Sure.
And I didn't see any response on those. So yeah, so this would be better worded as saying there were suggestions for, as you said, avenues of thought that were not yet adopted, and they certainly could be. We're not done. So status is we're not done, and I'm expressly opening up the ickiness as a open issue that multiple people, one person said icky and one person said yes it is. And I've heard this all along, by the way. So I'm not a proponent for these are good things to do. They're the normal way we do them in the IETF. They're not. And I'll actually go through the 3 of them next. But short of that, since there is a desire for the goals of the document to be implemented as a standard, at some point the working group's going to have to say, this is too icky, we don't want to move forwards, or this is just fine, it's great, or somewhere in between. But the working group's going to have to decide if we still want to meet the goals, do we do it? Elliot?
Thanks, Paul. Elliot Lear. Forgive me, this is just a slightly two-bit abstract for me in terms of using the word ickiness. Will you delve, sorry, it's just a little bit too abstract for me in terms of the word ickiness. I'm sure nobody's ever used icky as being abstract, but could you, maybe if you have a follow-on slide or something like that, can you explain what, can you summarize the ickiness issues or something like that so we know?
No, because they didn't come from me. So if either Martin or Steve Farrell want to get to the mic line when we're done, they can do so. But no, I do not want to speak for other people on this. I barely want to speak for myself on this, but I absolutely, and you don't want me speaking for other people either. As Martin just pointed out, I actually got this slide wrong as well. So.
Okay.
Okay.
So
So
it's
they
very
may-
hard to
they might
understand
come
this
to the mic.
conversation, though, is my
Right,
point.
I understand. They might come to the mic and explain what they don't like. Okay, so the last bullet has come up recently, which is 2 of the 3 protocols don't have any authentication in them, and the third one does, but that authentication, it bothers some people in that, oh, that'll be harder, that won't work. And so it seems like there is now discussion both for this document and in general about authentication in this realm. Don't know where that'll go. Ecker, did you want to talk about authentication?
Yes, sort of. Eric Riscola. Sorry, what better? I don't know.
I've got more slides, so why don't we, unless it was like a clarification on this, why don't we, yeah. And we do have time for Q&A. Yeah, we definitely have time for Q&A. So let me do, those are the 3 things I'm about to discuss, which are the 3 protocols. They're in the same order as they are in the draft. I'm going to just show you what they are. I'm not going to explain the whole thing. Hopefully, if you get up to the mic, you've read the draft. I know that's hopefully in many cases, but since we have such a limited time here, that's an extra hopefully. So I'm going to explain the 3, and then we'll have the last slide, and then we'll have the mic line. So the first one's called DOE servers from HTTPS. It uses a well-known URI, .wellknown, with a hyphen there, that can be resolved, and it will return the URI templates. So the URI would look like this, and that the all caps, I would have put it in bold and blinking if I could. IP address goes here. An application, a browser, a web application, JavaScript or something, who has the IP address of the resolver sends this query to it, and it gets back a JSON blob. That's that protocol. If you don't have the IP address of the resolver, but you can send text queries, you can do DOE servers from DNS. You create a query for a special use domain name that is being invented for this, which is called resolver associated doe.arpa. Plenty of bike shedding there on what we would call it. Well, Warren, if you're going to laugh out loud the most, you're the one who started bike shedding, okay? So you send a query for a text record, and you get back. So you just send a normal query. You say resolver associated doe R type of text, and you get back. And since it's really hard to show what people get back without going into the bit, so I actually chose the master file format for the current draft. You get back some text records, and the text records have the URIs in them. So we've also started talking about, do we want to use text instead of a new case? Do we want to use the URI? But then you'd have to actually fill in, you'd be getting back information you're not using. So, but the idea is, if you can create a non-A quad A query, especially text query, which apparently some operating systems can do, although now I'm not sure why I think that, so I'd love to hear if I'm just imagining that. You can get these back, and now you've got the URI templates for DOE. The third one is, if you can't do that, but you want to get the A or quad A of the local resolver, so that you can then do this one. Here is a way to get the A or quad A of your local resolver. You make a different, you use a different special use domain name, in this case resolver addresses.arpa. The resolver catches that, says, here are my addresses, and send them back. Okay? So that's useful for clients that can only send queries for addresses such as JavaScript or JavaScript running in a browser. Okay, so those were the three. Hopefully everyone who's going to ask questions is familiar with those, because those have been in the draft for weeks now, or actually more than weeks, a few months now. So what's next? It would be nice to get some feedback from resolver vendors saying we can implement this, we can't, we already have, we've got it in some beta code or whatever. But also, it may be that these are not the way that the working group wants to do this, which goes back to the ickiness question. There might be other ways. And then we have to decide how long to take. So that's it. Mike Klein?
Hi, Brian Dixon from GoDaddy. Could you go back one or two slides?
Yes. To which one?
Previous one, that one. About the special use domain name. There's one issue, I think, as far as the use of possibly DOS servers where there's an existing chain of forwarders. And one of those wants to be the thing that upgrades itself to being a DOS server as well as a DNS forwarder. I think you need to be able to disambiguate the entities in that forwarder chain, which suggests some way of them identifying themselves separate from this, and then using that entity's name rather than just a single special use domain name.
Okay. Send that to the list, especially if you have a way of differentiating. I don't know that we've ever dealt with forwarders, DNS forwarders in the IETF as separate entities, but absolutely send that to the list.
Sure, thanks.
Now we can talk about authentication. Eric Priscola. So, I mean, the question about authentication, as always, is what is your threat model?
Yep.
And so I assume the version one you're talking about as authentication is the one where you go to https:// IP address here, right?
Right, because, and just to be clear, this one has authentication. That's what the S is for. These two do not. You cannot authenticate these special use domain names even if you were validating DNSSEC, because they aren't, they don't go up the chain. So
Yes.
This is exactly the one we're talking about.
Sure, good. My put would be that you can't meaningfully authenticate this, and even if you could, it wouldn't matter. So first, why can't you meaningfully authenticate it? For starters, with very high probability, the address here is like 10.0.0.1. Even if it's not 10.0.0.1, with very high probability, you got it from your DHCP server, which means basically the network is lying to you and you have a network security problem anyway. Even if those things were not true and someone had actually configured the address in here, the ordinary behavior for the vast majority of like sensible DOE resolvers is going to be that since you don't actually know you're going to have DOE, you're just checking, right?
Right. Is
to try this, and if you can't connect, then you go, gee, I guess I don't have DOE.
Right.
So a network attacker, and so as a practical matter, and then you fall back to ordinary DNS. So, as a practical matter, any attacker with any significant control of the network can force you back to an unauthenticated posture. So this authentication doesn't really do anything, as far as I can make out.
Right.
So I guess I'm not like super enthused about this HTTP version at all. Not like gonna fall on my sword to stop it, but like I'm not super enthused about it. I guess
why? I hear not super enthused. Are you against it short of falling on your sword? And if so, why?
Just see it. I don't see the additional value it adds. So the question I was going to ask, the next question I was going to ask was going to be, is the only additional value it supposedly adds that is authentication? Because if that is so, then I would suggest you remove it. If there's some other value that I'm not seeing, then I'm not like opposed to having it.
So a JavaScript app that can is able to create URLs and send them out can send this out and get back the DOE servers.
Yeah, so I guess I'm like, my guess would like I'm not like a world's expert on like how people plan to deploy these JavaScript apps, but like I would strongly suspect that the people who have these JavaScript apps also know what resolver they want to use and will populate it with like the domain name when they configure the app.
But that's true also. Many people in this room would believe that's true about the current browser vendors anyways. So
Well, okay.
all of this is to give them an opportunity to not do that.
Sure. I don't want to like get into like over design of like these things.
Right.
But, you know, it might or might not be useful to the browser vendor to be
Mhm.
aware of like who was operating the system, the local resolver on the network. That would be information we might be able to use.
Mhm.
So yes, it's possible we pre-configure, but it's also possible we'd be interested in what the local dope resolver was, whether we chose to use it or not.
Okay, great, thanks.
Ralph Weber, Akamai is speaking for a resolver vendor in that case. So the thing that kind of I have a bit of a problem is I don't want to run an HTTP server on my recursive resolver. So I'd rather have maybe rearrange the documents that you always do the addresses from as a special name, and then the resolver can hand you to a HTTP server farm for actually doing that.
Okay.
I think that would be better.
Can you send wording on that? Because currently the document doesn't have an order or a preference.
Okay.
If you can do that, that'd be great.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to apologize for being Martin Thompson. So no applause, please. The objections that I have here are somewhat more fundamental than I think we've been discussing at this level. I kind of agree with the folks who are saying I'd rather not run an HTTP server on my resolver. I think that makes perfect sense. But the objection is more fundamental than that, and it is, why are we talking to an HTTP server about a DNS server in the first place? Why can't we talk to the DNS server about the DNS server? And is there, someone said layer violation. That doesn't make any sense to me, but feel free to join the line and explain. We have, in other protocols, ways to talk to the other endpoint of that protocol as if it were the other endpoint of that protocol. And DNS is kind of unique in the way that you just make queries for DNS records when you talk to a resolver. You don't ever get to talk directly to the resolver itself. And my objection was that this is really what we want to do in this case, and we're inventing all of these sort of circuitous ways in which to do that, simply to get around that.
I'm not understanding what you're saying. I get that this is you're not talking HTTPS, you know. Are you saying that getting DOS servers from the DNS or getting resolvers addresses from the DNS is also wrong?
Maybe.
Okay, so you're not saying that clearly or not? Okay,
I'm not sure what that is. And part of the problem here is that I don't have enough background in DNS as a system and as a system resolvers to know whether that's a good idea or not. But the fundamental objection is you don't have an explicit way to say, I would like to talk to the resolver, the thing at the other end of this, the thing that's going to be taking this message that I'm going to be sending out asking for an A record or what have you. I can't talk to that thing. Now, in HTTP, we have over time evolved the ability to talk to the other end of the connection in various ways. We can put in header fields that say this is a header field intended for the other end of this hop. Or we have settings in HTTP2 that allow us to say, well, this connection is going to be doing the following things and so on and so forth. And if we were able to talk to the resolver and say, hey, resolver, what is your configuration for DO, explicitly and directly, then I think we're in a much better place for solving this problem, finding out whether DNS over TLS is available, and all these sorts of things.
Yep.
And it gives us a basis for having more discussion in the future.
Okay.
Does that clarify
Yeah, it does.
where my review was coming from?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, one pause for the mic line. Just want to observe that with the amount of time that we have, I'm going to cut the line after Peter, but we also have Ben Schwartz waiting in the mic line, and Ben, you entered right after Eric Nygren, and so we'll get to you right after Eric goes.
John Reed, Akamai. First, one point of clarification, and I'm happy to discuss this further on the list. When you mentioned that the list should be considered a set, the list of resolvers returned, is there room for discussion about considering it an ordered list?
Sure, there is. However, in this case,
yes, I realize the problem there.
So, but we can change that by making it using the URI RR
Sure.
type or whatever. So yes, I chose a set because when I thought I'm running a resolver, why the hell would I give more than one? And if I gave more than one, what does it mean? And then as I thought as a stub resolver, how the hell would I choose? I just said, this would take 5 paragraphs. Why don't I just call it a set? So yeah, that's absolutely an open question. So please take it to the list.
Will do. Second question, is there room for discussion in the context of this draft about end user interaction and information such that, we say what happens when the empty set is returned, there's no dough. Can we make a recommendation that, the application should tell the user this rather than falling back to a default?
That's normally not what we do.
I've seen it both in and out of scope.
Sure.
And then I guess the last point is regarding authentication for the HTTPS query for IP addresses. On the flip side of what Rolf said, if I was both a resolver vendor and a CDN vendor and wanted to use the CDN to terminate that connection, putting IP addresses in the SAN entries of the certificate as well as all the DNS names that are in there is problematic because, we talk about if TLS fails, we should consider this to have failed. I think TLS can easily fail unintentionally or be made difficult to succeed. So something to keep in mind.
Great, thanks.
Hi, Paul. Pat McManus. Oh, good slide. So I largely agree with Ecker on the front that what you're authenticating here is basically unauthenticated information that you're authenticating at the next level. And that's then transitive on actually to your connection to the DO server, right? So you're connecting to the DO server that something, when you go all the way down the rabbit hole, told you to that was unauthenticated to do. So there's no need to add authentication to this level because it's just kind of snake oil from that point of view. And I guess my bigger concern is people may say I'm okay using my DO resolver from my local network because I trust my local network. But they don't really trust their local network. They trust their local network provider, if they do at all. But if they express that kind of relationship, and there's no actual technical mechanism here to say that you are on your local network or your local network is providing this information, right? And it's going to go transitive all the way up to validating the DO server name, and it's a bit meaningless at that point, unless you validate something other than the name. And I made sort of a mailing list post that's out of scope for this draft, talking about maybe what you could do there, longer term. But
Actually, let me answer that with, since you probably aren't following the DNSOC mailing list. So,
but I am.
Oh, you are? Okay. So the very short terminology additions that I threw in were meant to at least touch on the questions you just brought up, and many people have been touching with large bats. That's an appropriate place to do so.
Sure, I'm not just going just to terminology. I would actually like in this draft some language that acknowledges that the DO server you choose to use through this mechanism is not authenticated past a level that your network configuration is, right? It has the same meaning, and that may not mean what you think it means. So
sounds good. Please send text. And I can say that to you because you're my co-author on DO. So, yeah.
Ted Hardy, and I really like his, this is the coffee shop DO server. You should trust it as much as you trust anything else you got from the coffee shop. Two quick questions for clarification. One, in the draft, what you currently have as instructions to IANA is that these domains under .arpa should not be delegated.
Must not.
Would it be okay to make these black hole delegations instead? And if not, why not?
Could be.
Oh, that would be great for IANA because then they won't get a bunch of queries to these in leaks. We can do black hole delegation the same way we did for...
Send text.
I will do. The second is a scope creep question. Yay! These are specific to DO at the moment, but you could easily imagine making these TLS protected DNS servers associated, just to make the acronym even worse, so that you could return both DOT and DOH, which have similar privacy properties. And as far as I can tell, would then allow a local sort list to tell whether they prefer DOT over DOH or to try them all. Would you be open to creeping your scope slightly?
I would be, but this is the DO working group.
I know, but
so why don't you hold that question for the recharter discussion? Because
okay.
So if we finish this work for just DO, it probably would be a minor respin to do it for dot or something like that. But it's a charter question, not a document question. At this moment, the document's about DOE.
Ted Hardy, I just point out that it affects this because the instructions to .arpa might be, to Anna about .arpa might be different if you creep the scope.
Okay.
I apologize, I'm not Martin Thompson. I am instead Warren Kamari, no hats. So I'm very sympathetic to being able to do this from JavaScript, but I also really think that people should be able to do this on like 1918 space, etc., and they won't be able to get certificates. If you do the HTTPS part, you can no longer do it with JavaScript, right? Because it's really, okay.
Eric Nygren, Akamai. One question I've been wondering is, do we really need all three of these mechanisms? And I think to Martin's point earlier, which I kind of agreed with, is that property of using DNS to ask the DNS resolver a question about DNS is really attractive, rather than kind of some of these other mechanisms that start getting convoluted. And from that perspective, the special use domain name really jumps out as being a highly attractive, solves a lot of the problems element, because it doesn't require the IP address certificates. It doesn't try to use HTTPS for something where the source of information itself is unauthenticated. It is something that actually, of these, is the only one you could potentially even usefully do from JavaScript, because in the JavaScript world, the bootstrapping case, if you need to know what your resolver is in the first place.
So this is the one you would be wanting us to use, but JavaScript can't ask this. And that may be what you want, because simplifying to this would be simplifying, but you're then excluding JavaScript apps from being able to get the address of the local DOE server. That is absolutely a possibility for the working group. Early on, people said that, one of my early ones, I don't even remember which one. By the way, I list all of my bad ideas in appendix if you haven't read the draft.
But that's all.
That wasn't enough. They wanted it to be more extendable. So perfectly valid question for the working group is whether we want to simplify down to one that is going to a DNS server.
And even from that perspective, it could be, if JavaScript doesn't have that interface today, is that something that would be reasonable to expect that browsers could implement?
That's the largest scope creep I've heard today so far. So you said that.
Are you done, Eric?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ben's up, so hold on, Jared.
And Martin, we did close the line.
Hi.
Can hear you.
Great. So first, I just want to talk about the fact that there's these at least two different options listed in this draft. I think that it's natural when approaching a new problem to think of all the sort of possible solutions and then list out the ones that seem likely to work. And so these do seem likely to work. But I do think that we should prefer to find a single solution unless we actually have implementers who are saying that they eventually intend to implement one and can't implement the other. So I would really appreciate it if we could get some more input from people who actually intend to implement this about which solutions they prefer for themselves. So in particular, I haven't heard any input from people who, for example, build local network appliances about which one they would be able to implement. I haven't heard a lot of input from browser vendors or operating system vendors about which one would be preferable or which other solution might be preferable to. Okay, that's my first comment.
Great, thank you.
And my second comment is, I think this has been addressed. I just want to be clear. So right now there's no web API, no JavaScript accessible web API for reading an IP address. Even if you can resolve a name, you can't find out the IP address that it resolved to. So do you believe that the draft as structured allows the JavaScript application to use this facility?
So I didn't know that the first of the things that you said was true. In fact, I thought that it wasn't. I thought that there is a JavaScript API in like the last few years that actually says, get me the address. If that's wrong, then the whole thing's wrong, and no one has pointed that out to me yet.
Okay, so that is my understanding. My understanding is that there is no such defined API. Now, it is true that if we removed the HTTPS authentication, you could go to http:// special use domain name, whichever one it is, the http:// do resolver IP, resolver addresses.arpa.
Yep.
And then it would resolve to an IP and, attempt to set up a socket, and you could go from there.
Okay.
But, okay. Because otherwise we can talk about like a W3C liaison action if you want an API that makes this possible.
Wow, we have scope creep in multiple different directions now. Cool. Okay. So yeah, thanks. And yeah.
And we should probably be clear, Ben, you were offering all those without your co-chair hat on, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great, thanks.
Hi, Jared Mach, recovering grumpy old network operator of some sort. So historically we've had a number of different ways to go and configure the DNS servers. Originally you configured them through bootp, and then, we started doing them in DHCP, and then we got everything split, in the whole Slack DHCP v6 world, and just a number of different ways. And we have this current trend right now in the IETF of taking protocols and encapsulating them inside of other protocols, because I guess that's trendy right now. And I'm very concerned about how we continue to do that. And I think it's fine to discuss all the possible solution spaces as part of that. But right now, what we're seeing is we used to see one protocol used to configure the DNS servers. And now we're seeing, as Eric mentioned, DNS being used to configure the DNS to do the DNS stuff. And the recursion involved in that, I think, is relatively hard to go and try and say, how can we go and, when I'm making feature requests to the hardware vendors, to say, hey, I'd like new network equipment to do this stuff, to go and say, by the way, you now need to implement all of these additional stacks that you never previously had, is very tall order for me as a networking person to go and do. And I'm concerned about this additional level of complexity that is being added in, which I understand has rewards for some subset of users, but there's broader equipment involved in it than just the browsers as well. And so I think these interactions are somewhat complex to go and look at, of how these pieces all interplay. And so if we need to go and ask our vendors to implement new things, we have to start somewhere. And having some standard like this makes me very concerned because of the number of ways it continues to kind of move through the process.
And Harold, we had closed the mic lines. So if you would dump into the Jabber room or email. Thanks.
Just a clarifying point on the address thing. I don't know if you want that.
Take it to the list. I mean, so far, we've also heard many people who are saying, let's get rid of the address thing. So I think all of that is good list fodder. Yeah. Peter?
Petr Špaček, CZNIC, now with Resolver implementer hat on. First of all, I would like to make the room realize that for us as Resolver vendors, there is no point in implementing DOH if nobody is going to find the endpoint, right? So if you want to see DOH implemented in open source resolvers, we need this or something else which will allow clients to detect the endpoint. So it's way more important than it seems. Otherwise, we will be stuck with Google and Cloudflare doing all the DNS over HTTP, and that's it. Second thing, I would suggest not to get stuck with the authentication problem because, for example, DHCP working group is stuck for 7 years or at least 7 years with trying to solve the secure DHCP, and this is basically the same thing, right?
So we had the BOF on that 2 IETFs ago, the DRIU BOF, and we came to that conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, it's just hard problem, and yeah, we shouldn't wait for solving that problem for having DOH option for clients.
Great. Good, thanks. So to answer the question of what's next, even though there wasn't a question mark here, lots of stuff on the mailing list, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So if some of you have maybe been paying attention to the DOE mailing list, you may have seen a little kerfluffle come up about operator considerations and work related thereto. We have, fortunately, Jason and Brian, Jim are here to, different read, to give us a little overview on the type of work that we think needs to be done, and then we're going to have a further discussion about where that kind of work should be done.
Okay, thanks.
If I could, still getting pulled up right now. So.
Got it.
Just quickly, as area director, want to step in and preface this a little bit. I also want to point out that I'm presently the area director of this working group. I will be handing it off to Barry tomorrow on stage at the plenary. But to sort of preface this, I want to point out that what we're doing here is soliciting input from the community. We're going to take that definitely as one of the things into consideration about where any subsequent work might go. But the art area directors and ops and possibly other parts of the IESG are probably going to have a conversation that involves other logistics as well about where this work ultimately ends up.
Well, that text is a bit mangled. So whatever. Yeah, so we've got two different drafts here. I think the key thing to bear in mind is that they're not really about the protocol itself, but really about implementation issues that arise from deployment. Next slide. Okay, these are still the old slides.
Are they?
Yeah.
Shouldn't have been.
Shoot. Oh, maybe I didn't refresh the page.
Right. Anyway, so
we'll get there.
So I think what we've got is the two different drafts. Jim will speak in a moment about his main draft. So in the first draft, in the one that I did, yeah, that's it. Perfect. Sweet. There you go. Yep. Next one. Yeah, so the first one, one of the points raised primarily is around the issues of centralization or consolidation. Those really touch on stability, security, and privacy, and have some other knock-on effects around software diversity and so on. Oh, thank you. And so I think at the end we'll come to the basic questions across all these, which is, what working group does it go to? Where does it really belong? Is it in charter here or not? And then the other issues were really primarily operational in nature around security threat visibility. This is like malware detection sorts of things, parental and other content controls, split DNS, sort of an enterprise use case, enterprise data leaks, national level legal mandates, which exist particularly in a bunch of European countries, captive portal impacts, and of course, other operational things, typical things you'd see, performance scaling and troubleshooting. And then, Jim, yours?
And just a quick chair interrupt on that. I mean, we're going to have a discussion about where these things should go, which will be input to the ADs who will decide where these things should go.
Thanks. The purpose of this particular draft is to try to document some of the problems that are going to exist in operator networks once DOE gets widely used and deployed, because it's going to have a significant disruptive impact on those networks. And the purpose we're trying to do in this particular draft is document that and come up with some use cases and define a problem statement. We're definitely not talking about blocking, other than the fact to say that blocking that you use in DNS blocking just now in these networks will no longer work in a world where DOE is widely used. And we really want a statement along that line coming from the IETF if this stuff will actually go forward. So the question we would like to hear is, there are questions that are left open in the current draft. There are things that need further meat on the initial skeleton of those things. There are some open issues, and there might be some other work that could be perhaps picked up by other working groups in the IETF, for example, around the use of session tickets and session resumption if there's lots and lots of DNS traffic going over these HTTPS connections. We also have, between the Jason's document and my document, there's a degree of overlap on the privacy issues, and pretty much it's the same fundamental problem that's described in both documents, which is we've got the potential for DNS queries going to third-party DOE resolvers, for some definition of that term, And those resolver servers may have unknown or unclear security policies, and what could be the potential impact of those in all sorts of other settings, regulatory, legal, and whatever else it is. So there's certainly some concerns around that need to be looked at. Now, that would be in scope potentially for this working group because privacy aspects are something that's mentioned in the charter. But we've also got another working group which is also looking at DNS privacy issues, DPRIVE. So the question is it appropriate to do it in DO, or maybe do it in DPRIVE, or maybe we do it somewhere else? Who knows? So I think the open questions, we would like maybe a little bit of discussion here. Are the issues raised in both these drafts, are they relevant and valid? And are they in scope for the working group? And if they're not, where should they be going? Does the working group want to work on them or help to try and refine these documents or improve them? And maybe we have to think about which other working groups might be appropriate if they have to be moved elsewhere. And so we're looking at essentially operational issues rather than protocol issues in these documents. So that kind of smells a little bit like inappropriate for the art area. So maybe this stuff needs to move to the ops area. Who knows? But that's a decision for other people, and maybe some people in the room might have a particular view about that. So it looks to me as there are several options or possibilities. Maybe we move the working group into the ops area, maybe we do a rechartering, maybe we need to spin up a new working group, or maybe we take an existing working group and dump all this stuff into them and have them deal with it. Although that might not be such a good idea because I can't see an immediate obvious fit in the ops area where there is a group that can maybe do that kind of thing. DNS op might be fine, but I think a lot of the web-based people would probably find participating in the DNS op working group a little bit of a tall order for them because there's so much other DNS stuff going on in there, it would probably alienate or frustrate them. And with that, I'm done, and it's time for questions.
Yeah, Jim, if I can use a chair privilege at the moment. Also, there's one unstated option here, which is it's not work for the IETF.
True, yes. Although, we'd have to say in counter to that, David, consider the amount of traffic we see on the list. It looks like there clearly is something for the IETF to work on. Yep.
So, yes, I see the line getting exciting. Jim and Jason will stay up here to answer questions about specific proposals, but we are looking for input on which particular issues are good for which particular places and which should be booted, and that kind of information is useful. Doing a deep dive on what they're proposing should be held for whatever the new work item, whether it's a new working group, new charter, new area will be. So let's talk about where stuff should go and what are important things to go.
Yeah. Just a quick interrupt on that one too, Pete, is there is a side meeting scheduled for tomorrow afternoon to discuss some of that stuff. So if you want to go into specific detail on the contents of these two drafts, that would probably be the best place to do that.
I also wanted to put one bit of historical context for the short history that DOE has existed is this was going to be the model of a pop-up working group, some one and done. And so the question about whether the work strings along for years is also comes with that context behind it.
Yeah.
RAD.
So I was going to advise you, we have 12 people in line, 12 minutes left in the session. I might start a timer.
Stephen.
Okay, Stefan Bartmeyer. Because there are many questions, I will focus on the centralization one. No, it's not on charter for the DOE working group because the risk that there is only 2 or 3 big public resolvers and everything going to these public resolvers is absolutely not specific to DOE. It's already the case with DNS over 53, DOE 53. So if it is for the specific case of the DNS, it should be done in DNS sub because it's clearly about DNS operation if there is interest. But I would like to point out that it's not even a DNS specific problem. It's a more general problem in the internet. When there is a dominance of a big player like Gmail, we don't ask the SMTP working group to change a protocol about it. And I would like also to remind people that there is some work at the IAB on a draft about what is called consolidation, which is, if I understand correctly, more or less the same as centralization. So no, it's not for the DOE working group.
And it sounds like you're thinking a new working group, perhaps. Not even, maybe DNS op, maybe new working group.
or maybe DNSOP, or maybe the IEB work, which is already taking place. No, I'm not in favor of creating a new working group because I don't see possible positive outcome.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vittorio Bertola from Open Exchange. I just wanted to point out that I'm the third author of the third draft that tries to address some of these issues, which, I mean, it is conceived in a slightly different way, since it's basically a write-up of the issues from, in general, for all types of users, and a set of recommendations for application makers. And as such, I thought it would fit with the Charter of Deprive, but what I wanted to say is that I'm, of course, happy to bring it, wherever we want to have the discussion. I think that the discussion has to be just one, so all these drafts and all these issues have to be discussed in a single place as far as we decide that they are in the mandate of the IETF, whatever we want to do. But I think that, but I think that in the end, it's advisable to just bring all the discussion on all the issues in a single place. So I'm happy to hear what it will be, if there will be one, and bring my draft as well. Though, I guess this will also be an item for discussion with the Deprive working group, which hasn't adopted the draft yet anyway. Maybe it will never do it. But so, just wanted to point out that we have to bring everything together and possibly give us a timely solution, because I think time is of the essence. And if this discussion, by the way, is starting to happen in other places, non-technical places. 2 weeks ago at the ICANN meeting, there were several constituencies starting to discuss the issues generated by the OH. And maybe that's a different set of issues that are not technical, not in mandate here, but still the discussion will also happen in other places. So if we want to have it here, we need to have it timely.
Hi, I'm Watson. I work at Cloudflare right now, nothing related to DOH. I'm very concerned that these drafts are looking at DOH and looking at operational issues with DOH and ignoring a long history of misbehavior by ISPs on DNS. Verizon is notorious for faking NX domain queries. They will not respond to NX domain. They will send you to a search page. This breaks several systems that rely on NX queries to fall over to another site. And I think if we're going to have a draft about operational issues, we also need to discuss the operational issues which users are solving by using DOH, which is to say ISP misbehavior. I'm concerned that this draft is going to be a one-sided threat or menace thing and isn't going to give a comprehensive overview of the issues, of the benefits of DOH as well as the costs.
Flip side.
Yeah, good point. I wrote a draft a few years ago about how NX domain redirection works. It could certainly be started back up again and talk about the effects on users. Thanks.
All right, Stephen Fowle. So definitely not this working group. I think the analysis in these drafts is not sufficiently baked to figure out what you should do with them, I think. Because, for example, we had a couple of people already say, this issue that you had on your slide, Jim, applies also to DNS over 53. So I think the analysis has to be redone better before I would have a clue as to how the IETF should process this.
You're thinking maybe boffing to figure out what the analysis is, or do it in some separate mailing list and then bring it back?
So I guess I'm kind of asking for the impossible, which is to objectively do it.
So, sorry, real quick. Ben, you're in the queue after Suze. So.
Sure. Suzanne Wolf, first as DNS Op Chair, and then I will switch hats for my next trick. This doesn't feel like DNS Op work to me. It does feel operational, but to the extent that there are technical issues implicated, it will need more than DNS people to come to reasonable analysis and correct answers. So unfortunately, that feels to me more like recharter or BOF plus working group or some other way to get this done. The switch, shift gently over towards DNS Op, I'm afraid doesn't work. Also, as an IAB member for the next couple of days, but not speaking for the IAB, the discussion has gotten even more challenging because it's hard to separate the layer 9+ issues from the technical ones. And even if they end up being dealt with in the same documents by the same people, it's going to be really useful to separate them better than they have been so far. The IAB and our Internet Society colleagues have already done some work on some of the policy and social issues that are coming out of consolidation and moving control points around within user interactions with the net. So checking out some of that work and perhaps moving some of the discussion in coordination with other folks outside of the IETF entirely would be helpful.
So Warren Kamari, and this is going to be a very poorly formed opinion.
Oh, sorry. We have
Ben's up.
Ben.
Oh, Ben.
Hi, Warren. Hi, this is Ben Schwartz, not speaking as a chair. Yeah, so I would appreciate a clearer taxonomy of the different kinds of issues that are in these drafts right now. Each of them seems to be a collection of many different concerns of different kinds. I would appreciate if those were structured into categories a little more clearly. That said, the dominant category that I see is concerns about browser behavior. And the IETF doesn't regulate browser user interfaces. To the extent that there is a body that does that, I think it's the W3C. And so, in my view, certainly at least the browser-related components of these drafts should probably be transferred to the W3C.
Interesting.
Thank you, Ben.
Warren.
So Warren Kamari, and sorry that this is going to be muddled, but Jim, every time you used the word dough, your sentence would have been equally valid if you had just dropped it, right? The same things fairly much occur with dough, DNS over 53, etc. A couple of weeks ago, when the discussions were happening on all of the mailing lists, I asked for a new mailing list to be created, which I was calling ADD, which is applications doing DNS. And it feels like that's actually a fairly good sort of view of what a lot of the concerns boil down to. Right? It's not actually happening over a specific protocol or transport. It's actually where the resolution happens. So maybe we should be thinking of it in that sort of way instead, sort of up-level the discussion.
Do you think that mailing list might be something that should become a working group?
I don't know. I mean, we have a process for that. We should figure out where this should live, but maybe we should move some of these sort of discussions there. Who knows?
Okay, quick note, we have technically 4 minutes left in the group and 8 people still waiting to speak, so as quick as you can.
30 seconds. Goshabek Groh, Center for Internet and Society. Yes, I agree with Stefan that centralization is an internet problem, but principally that should not prevent a working group from working on the centralization effects of a particular protocol. That said, I think there are several issues in the drafts as they currently stand. Some issues are just superficial, like relating to privacy. Even if you use a DOS server for DNS queries, you can have a privacy policy that you're accepting, etc. And I mean, even though the Living Good draft doesn't say it's from a network operator side, it does feel that way. There are several advantages to DOS that, I mean, the drafts will benefit from recognizing.
Kirsty P, NCSC. I'll be brief. I just want to thank you for bringing the drafts to the group. I know they represent a lot of concerns that I've heard from various industry players, and I think it's good that you're bringing them into the group. I'm a relatively new attendee here, so I'm afraid I don't know exactly where this work should go, but it does seem to me that the DOE Charter says it will consider privacy and security issues. You're bringing privacy and security issues about DOE to the group, but I just want to thank you for the work you've done and in highlighting these issues. So, I mean, I don't really care where it gets worked on, but I think it certainly should be worked on.
Elliot Lear, this work I think is should continue, and it should continue in the IETF because we've created the protocols involved that you're reacting to. I agree with Ben Schwartz on the point that the taxonomy could use a little bit of work, and probably it's worth the IAB chiming in as to how much they want to take in from the concentration discussion that you raised in particular, Jason. And I think, but the previous comment that was made is also relevant. The specific issues that either DOE or DOT raises in terms of market concentration are at least worthy of a little bit of exploration, but I wouldn't want to place the focus on just that. And so I look forward to working on this with you guys. I think an issue tracker will help quite a lot at some point very soon, and just let us know where that's going to drop.
Hi, Pat McManus. I'm going to make the argument that we have actually already published a semantic equivalent of this document just last July. It was RFC 8404, the effects of pervasive encryption on operators. And it is very, very similar to the material in these drafts, to the point where if you just scan through the table of contents, we talk about content filtering, troubleshooting, managing your networks, the effects on mail abuse and spam, denial of service, phishing, botnets, very, very similar stuff. And to the extent we feel that that document requires an update for some unforeseen effect of ubiquitous encryption on operating your network, that document was done in the security area, and I would pursue an update there.
If we can beg your patience for just 5 more minutes, I think we'll be able to have everybody in the mic line have their final say. So.
I'm Brian Dixon, GoDaddy. There is some overlap, I believe, in the operational side of things between DOH and DOT. And in particular, I think there are some problems raised that may be better handled in the DOT context and be worth exploring together, regardless of where it ends up. Specifically, in DOT, there's a new thing in DNS, which is DNS stateful operations, which has applicability to DOT that would potentially give the ability to signal to the first DOH server about a second DOH server that you want to use for privacy. That I don't know if it's possible to do in DOH, but working together on both of them together in a different working group or new working group or with the recharter, I think would be very mutually beneficial.
Ralph Akamai, thanks for bringing all this up. I think some of the issues are really DOH and DOT sort of are in the same boat. It's a secure DNS transport, and we need to come up with operational way to deal with secure DNS transport. And one of the things that came up was provisioning. This is something that needs to be solved. So it needs to be solved for DO and for DOT. So maybe having something that tries to solve this together would be a good idea.
Leslie Daigle, Thinking Cat Enterprises. I stood up specifically to push back on the idea that this should just get punted to the W3C because I don't think it's just a browser issue. To the extent that the documents make it about a browser issue, then that's an editing issue. Because really, fundamentally, the question is how is DO and maybe DO and DOT, how are they breaking our host assumptions about how DNS is used from the host perspective? So I think there is work to be done here. I don't think it's just the secure transport issue. I think there are issues at the level of operationally, what are our expectations in terms of how resolution happens. So maybe it's an ops area thing. Fine to do a further exploration of other documents that should be referenced, including possibly, yes, wouldn't it be nice to kill NX domain falsification dead? Thanks.
Thanks, and Wendy Seltzer, W3C. Maybe the third time I heard W3C, I'd consider that a summons to get up and join the mic line. Hi, Ben. I think similarly, there are plenty of issues that are at W3C concerns that fine to have addressed here, and I don't see a reason for W3C to jump in and say they should only happen over in that group. If the right people are in this conversation, then and I haven't particularly heard this conversation in W3C groups. If there are more groups that you would like to have engaged, I can poke at some of those, but there is also considerable overlap in the security folks who participate in both conversations. And I believe the technical architecture group at W3C has done some thinking about the consolidation questions.
All right, thank you. Thank you for not throwing food at your temporary chair. And that was actually, I think, very productive for the ADs to hear, and they are going to discuss next steps and give us some feedback on this discussion.
So thank you, everybody, for the polite discussion, and enjoy your lunch.
Thank you. I also I want to point out real quick, there is a working group chairs luncheon here in like 10 minutes. So if you could clear the room quickly, I'm certain that the working group chairs lunch would appreciate it.